It's so important to understand that you are your own best advocate. And the truth is that if you zoom out, all these things that we do to occupy our time really matter very little in the grand scheme of things. But putting yourself in a situation where you want to give up, where you want to quit, where the only thing that's stopping you is yourself, you trained your brain on how you respond to a crisis, how you respond to difficult circumstances.
Building something of value looks different for everybody, particularly in the day and age that we live in. And today you're going to meet somebody who has created value in a very unique way. Someone who has a background in athletics, aesthetics, entrepreneurship, the CEO and founder of Roan. Please welcome Mr. Nate Checketts. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing great. It's great to be with you.
I think an optimal place to start is one impactful piece that I read of yours about being a father in light of an incident that happened in your family, which I don't even know the right words to necessarily bring to attention, but faith, family, and just prayer, I feel, are optimal words to use when it comes to what I read happened to you and your family. And certain things happen to certain people because certain people can handle that load. And I hate to put that upon you, but it seems like you are the type of person who could communicate the stress of an incident that happens to a child. And I think an optimal place to start is, how is everyone? Are you okay to share what happened? And let's start there.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you asking about it and being so sensitive and thoughtful about it. I mean, so just to zoom out and give the listener, I'm totally fine and open to talk about it. It's a really powerful thing that happened in mine and my family's life, and we feel like it's a real opportunity to share and discuss openly some of the blessings and benefits that we saw during an otherwise really difficult moment. So what happened is I was at work. I got a call from my wife. We have three boys. At the time, we had a 10-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 3-year-old. And my 3-year-old and 7-year-old were running around couch and toy room, and 7-year-old fell and hit his head on a piece of furniture that attaches to our couch. And it's this kind of heavy wooden block. And he started complaining, of all my three boys, he's probably the most dramatic. So it was not unusual that he was kind of upset. My wife called me, said, "Hey, Will fell. He was running around. Will fell and he hit his head." And it just was so commonplace that somebody got a scratch or we need stitches. Or I said, "Okay, well, is he okay?" She said, "No, he's really upset." And I said, "Okay, well, let me know if it gets worse." And she called me back. She's like, "He just threw up." And I knew enough about head injuries to know that was serious. And I also felt this like really overwhelming, strong emotion that I needed to get home. And as soon as I got there, I realized we did not have a lot of time to get to the hospital. And long story short, he needed what's called a subdermal hematoma, which means that he had an internal brain bleed. My uncle actually died from a subdermal hematoma or an internal brain bleed, and many of these go undiagnosed because there was, in his case, there was no bruise, there was no cut. He was just upset. He said, "It feels like my skull is on fire." Not many 7-year-olds have the words for that. And sadly, some of these, what happens, especially in children, is they're not reviewed. They're not given kind of a real neurological evaluation, and it will kill you. Brain bleeds that go undiagnosed and untreated, especially slow ones, will take someone's life, and it happens every single day. So we rushed to the hospital. We got there, and the last thing that we heard after he got his CT scan, which we really had to fight for, is that the surgeon said to me,
You should zone in on that for a second. Fight for is probably one of I'm sorry to cut you off in the middle of such an intense story, but you were extremely bold based on what I was reading and understanding in that moment where you had to be so persistent and communicate that there was such a serious issue to the point that you're like quite literally and physically like blasting doors open with like your leg or something to drive the point home that your child needed attention.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so important to understand that you are your own best advocate when it comes to health and any kind of issue, but certainly with children, you have to be their advocate. And I got to the hospital, and my son at this point, we I carried him in. He couldn't even sit up. He had passed out, so he was in a wheelchair. And ERs are not places where, ironically, you feel a level of urgency. And so they had us fill out some paperwork, which I did quickly. And I said, ma'am, he needs a CT scan. She said, I know, we've let the doctors know. Please wait in the waiting room. I went up again. He needs a CT scan, and I'm not waiting. I'm not leaving here until you talk to the doctor. He said, I've done everything I can do. I just have to wait at this point. So at that point, I went into the ER, the pediatric ER. I said, my son is going to die unless someone takes a look at him. And at that point, the doctor said, we've got someone on the table. Do you want me to take that person off? I said, unless that person is in a life or death situation, then yes, I need you to remove them and take a look. And when she came and looked, she opened his eyes. And with a brain bleed, you can develop what's called a blown pupil, meaning the pupil basically dilates so small that, and so he had a blown pupil at this point, which we hadn't identified because he was closing his eyes. And she was like, all of a sudden, the whole ER came to life. She took him to the back. And at that moment, we knew we were in a very serious situation. They sent in a priest to come and talk to us. And I was like, I was not nice. I was like, you get out of here. Nobody's dying tonight. Like, I'm not talking to you right now. We are focused on solving this problem. If not for the incredible, remarkable attention of an internist there who got the CT scan, illegally took a screenshot of it or took a picture of it with her own phone and texted a pediatric neurosurgeon that she had worked with who lived 15 minutes away, my son would have died. And they came back and they were like, our only option, there's no pediatric neurosurgeons in the area. The only thing we can do is we can life flight him to Yale and New Haven. But this doctor, this neurosurgeon, who, by the way, happened to have 3 boys himself and was playing Legos with his middle son when he received this text, and his wife was gone, said, you cannot send that boy to Yale. He will not make it. I'm on my way. And he left his oldest in charge. It's kind of emotional to talk about because there's just so many things that went and happened along this path for my son to survive. But he left his oldest in charge and he came to the hospital. And if not for some of these little moments that happened, he wouldn't have made it. And in fact, the surgeon said to me right before he went in, he said, look, I cannot guarantee your son is going to make it through this surgery. If he does, you need to start preparing yourself that there may be some lasting impacts to him neurologically from a speech, from a motor behavior standpoint. The long story short is that Will not only survived the surgery, but has completely thrived, has shown no neurological deficits as a result of this traumatic brain injury, and is doing really, really well as a thriving 7th grader. And it was but it was a very difficult, emotional situation that changed me forever.
Reading that story and hearing you talk about it now, I'm a parent. I know people in the audience are parents, and it's such a key reminder that just because a medical authority tells you something that you can't question it. My daughter had a hemangioma on her head, and we saw like multiple opinions of how to handle it. And, you know, she was like less than 6 months old. We were told, oh, it'll go away, it'll fade on its own. And like, next thing you know, she needs surgery. And obviously it's not of the same nature, but it's just one of those moments where you're told one thing by a medical authority, and like, you kind of take a passive approach, and slowly certain things start to come to light, and you need to be more brazen in your approach, and realize that if, like you said, you're not your own best advocate, then someone or something bad could happen. And the only way to really make any kind of meaningful difference is to trust your intuition, to have enough wherewithal and character to realize that it's not just what's in your best interest, it's what's in your child's best interest. And I don't really talk too much about parenting on this podcast. It's always about mindset and motivation and inspiration. And in reading your story, it was a catalyst for me to realize that there may be a moment in the future that I need to be that bold and brazen. And just because a medical authority tells me one thing doesn't mean I'm going to lean into that. And this is just one example of, well, one doctor told me it was time to operate now, and the thing wasn't done growing, and I was like, well, maybe it's not time to operate. You just have a economic incentive for us to
Yeah, sure.
operate.
Yeah.
And thank God we didn't go in that direction. And I want you to know that your story definitely was a catalyst in me being able to question that authority. So,
One of the most powerful things, and I get that people have varying degrees of faith in a higher power, but one of the things that was so honestly scary for me is as we were on the way to the hospital, I got this very strong impression that this was going to be a life altering experience. And that I even said verbally to my wife, effectively through prayer, that we were going to have to share this story with others without knowing what we were dealing with, without knowing the outcome. It was such a wild feeling. And I did not want to take the time to write this story down because it was extremely painful to relive every moment of that. But I have heard from so many parents, including multiple parents whose kids have ended up hitting their head, having brain bleeds, but because they were more aware of that being a risk as a result of reading this, that they were in tune to get their kids the appropriate medical attention that they needed. And not all of them need to be treated in the same way. And, speed really, really matters on these things. So anyways, I appreciate you giving me the platform and the ability to share it. And I'm really grateful for so many people who have read that story and commented on it.
well, it's very powerful, and probably the last thing you thought you'd be known for is starting a podcast on, when it comes to entrepreneurship. But I felt it's a very opportune place to begin, because someone's alive because of it, and that someone is your son, and a lot of stars had to align. But I'm also grateful for that outcome and all the lessons that you learned, because I'm one of those people that can say they benefited.
Well, thank you. Thanks for sharing that.
Of course, man. So you said that you've changed. Do you find that you've changed as a man, as a father, as an entrepreneur? What are some of the elements of who Nate Checketts is that have shifted since that particular event?
I think the main thing is just understanding and prioritization, right? I used to be much more driven by the highs and lows of, what's happening in our daily revenues or, what's happening in the business. And the truth is that if you zoom out, all these things that we do to occupy our time really matter very little in the grand scheme of things. They are hopefully worthwhile endeavors. Hopefully they're bettering the lives of you, your family, and others. But ultimately, what matters most is the way that you treat other people, the way that you build and develop long-term relationships, and those things are, independent of what might be happening in the day-to-day business. My dad worked in professional sports, and I remember, he worked with the Knicks and the Rangers, and if there was ever a like losing streak, and that happened, even in the '90s, I remember just how hard it made everything else for him. Like everything else felt harder as a result. And so I've had these conversations with him. He's like, we would look at were our ticket prices right? We'd start looking at, did we have the right ushers in the right places? Did we, Was the fan experience right? Were we serving the best food? What was the halftime show like? We were trying to control every variable, but we were only focused on those things generally when we were losing. And sometimes we were just barely losing. And so, but none of those ultimately had an impact on whether or not the ball was going in the basket. Sometimes I think in life we start doing that. When things are hard, we start over analyzing everything. And the truth is that we need to have some level of analysis when things are really good, and be practical and say, oh, we can still get better here, here, and here. And when things are bad, we probably need to be a little less analytical and more patient and understand some of this is outside of our control. Sometimes the ball goes in the bucket and sometimes it doesn't. And so for me, this experience was really valuable at detaching myself, deriving value from whether or not the business was performing, and deriving value from the things that I think matter far more, which is taking care of my family, taking care of my team, taking care of myself. I think it kind of shifted the prioritization. And it also makes you really sensitive that you can't always see what people are going through. I bet people who talk to you have no idea what your child's gone through.
Yeah, that's definitely something that, I mean, you know, for her, something like that could shape her identity. And so you want to handle it sooner than later because people could look at her differently, feel differently, and they don't do it consciously or anything like that, but it can definitely shape the way that she sees herself. And so you have to be a mature parent, however old or young, and consider that consequence. And you mentioned your dad. I'm Forgive me if I inaccurately researched this, but I believe there was also a role he played with the Jazz
He did. Yeah, that's where he started his career in professional sports with the Jazz.
as a general manager, if I'm not mistaken.
You're right. So he was 28 years old. I think
It's a bit
still
of
to
an
this day. I'm not.
undersold. My dad
Yeah,
was in professional sports.
yeah, that's probably fair. It's a really cool story on how he ended up there. He was working at Bain, and Bill Bain, who's the founder of Bain, wanted to buy the Boston Celtics. And my dad just happened to be the only collegiate basketball player at the firm. So he got put on the case and research. And in that process, he met David Stern. And David Stern was the deputy commissioner of the NBA. And when he asked him where he was from, my dad grew up in Utah. He was like, oh, well, I should connect you to the ownership group there, because that team was in serious trouble. They were $10 million in debt. I mean, people forget that basketball in the 1980s, the NBA, it was not what it is today. It was not a powerhouse. The games were coming on tape delayed, after a soap opera. And so much so that when they offered my dad this position, my grandpa, my mom's dad was like, hey, I actually think I can get you to be an assistant manager at this car dealership down the street. That was the alternative. He could go run an NBA team, or he could go be an assistant manager at a car dealership, and it wasn't a clear, obvious decision for him. I mean, it was for him, but yeah, the rest, as they say, is history. He drafted Karl Malone, John Stockton, and the Jazz had a lot of success there, and that led him to a career at NBA, running NBA International for a very brief period of time, and then to the Garden, where he oversaw Madison Square Garden, the Knicks, and the Rangers.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Inside the Inspired. My name is Jonathan Cohen, and I have a quick favor to ask you. If you're getting any value out of this content, please take a second to subscribe to the channel. You help us reach more people, and you can also stay up to date with all the latest content coming your way. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll catch you in the episode.
To make decisions like that, it carries a lot of foresight. How have you learned from your dad, and how has it translated to what you do now to see such incredible, disproportionate results? And I guess what I mean by that is Roan's a very successful company by all measures, objectively, subjectively, taste, and otherwise. I promise we'll get to talk about Roan. First, we're just getting to know you. I'm curious because I look at my dad as a role model, probably my number one role model, and I know the lessons that I learn from him on a daily basis.
Yeah.
How how has your dad's role as someone who's done things like have, I guess, great taste, right? But also have that foresight and wherewithal to take the risk and and make the choice, the unpopular choice, in the face of so much uncertainty. How's that played a role in your life?
Yeah, it's been an enormous impact for me because not only did I get a front row seat to watching him make some of these difficult decisions in the MBA and then afterwards, where has spent his time, but I still talk to him every single day. I mean, not a day goes by where we're not talking. And we have a scheduled breakfast weekly where we get together and I kind of say, here's what I'm dealing with. How do you think about this? So I go to him for a lot. And the only thing that people miss, it's funny. I've kind of watched this and I see it all the time. When you see anyone who's had a level of success, sometimes children of those people want to detach themselves from that reality. They want to make it on their own. They want to, prove something. And I realized what a fool's errand that is. The reality is like, you should just embrace that to the nth degree. I mean, I was born incredibly fortunate to have two. The only thing people miss is they don't recognize my amazing mother, who's just, every bit my dad's equal, so inspirational to me, has taught me so much. But, sometimes it's like, oh, well, you were born on third base and thought you hit a triple. And I'm like, I'm not going to argue with you. I agree with you. I'm so lucky. Like, what more could I say? And I'm not going to hide from it. He is such an incredible thinker. And I think he raised us in a way to dream big and to go after big ideas and to dare more than anything else. He's just a big thinker and he always believes you can do it, so I think that's one of the great things that parents can give their kids is confidence to believe. That's been the most valuable thing for me in my relationship with him and what I admire so much about him because he had a vision when he was at the Garden to help get guns off the street. So he came up with this concept of people could anonymously turn in any firearm, no questions asked, in exchange for tickets. And they collected like 3 million handguns off the streets of New York as a result of this ticketing initiative. So powerful. But this all came from this idea that he had. Anytime anyone has a crazy idea, they might think, oh, well, here's 10 reasons why that wouldn't work. My brain starts thinking, yeah, of course that could work. We could definitely make that happen. And I think that is probably, I owe that 100% to my parents.
That's so relatable because as someone who, I mean, for the longest time, my identity was tied up in my father's success and me feeling the need to escape that and create my own, like get out of his shadow, create my own. I spent 5 years public service, 2 different countries, soldier, criminal prosecutor, only to realize like home is where the heart is. And I'd be a fool not to learn from who I believe to be the greatest entrepreneur. Now I have the privilege of working with him and to hear you talk about it in the same way I've learned to look at it. Maybe it took me a little bit too long to learn the lesson, but at the same time, I think, like you said, having that front row seat to what great thinkers do on a daily basis and how they hold themselves out, how they make decisions, how they operate. I'm curious, you talked about the relationship. Let's talk about Rome for a bit. Obviously, there's some ups and downs. You alluded to it before, and tying up your reactions or emotions based on whatever the business was doing. How do you
Right.
find yourself? It sounds like you've gained some perspective through what's happening to you, but now that it's been some time, do you still have that perspective, or would you say, I guess I'll ask the question more directly. How do you manage your emotions now when there's highs and lows in the business?
I think one thing that I really believe in is developing a toolkit for, we call it mental fitness. I know you call it mental toughness. And it's something that I believe in is that like, if you want your body to be physically ready and capable when your friend says, hey, let's go do a Spartan race this weekend, or let's say your building catches on fire and you've got to find a way to get through it, or you develop a upper respiratory infection and your body's got to fight through it. There's so many different ways, not nearly as much as our ancestors had to physically, which is a huge part of the problem. But training, taking care of yourself, hydrating, sleeping, all those things matter when your physical body gets challenged. And the funny thing is, we do not make the same connection to our mental toughness or our mental fitness, but it's very similar. We can't expect ourselves to know how to react to a problem when we get challenged emotionally, mentally, if we haven't done the work, if we haven't prepared ourselves to go through that. And that doesn't mean necessarily artificially placing yourself in a stressful mental situation, but in some ways it does, right? So part of it is developing, for me, some people love a meditation practice. My big thing is breath work, learning to control my breath, because when I get nervous, when I get anxious, I find I stop breathing and my heart rate goes up, and all those things can lead to poor decision making. So learning how to get control of my breath is really important to me. The other thing that I love to do, which a lot of people think is crazy, is I love cold exposure. I'll go swim in a very cold ocean or submerge myself in a cold bath of water. I do it, probably 3-4 times a week. It's really helpful for me because it's hard to create that emotionally draining situation, but putting yourself in a situation where you want to give up, where you want to quit, where the only thing that's stopping you is yourself, that can be incredibly helpful and valuable when you get into some of these circumstances where you want to run and hide and duck and cover. You've trained your brain on how you respond to a crisis, how you respond to difficult circumstances. So the way I look at it is, it's just building a mental health toolkit. And then let's say something bad does happen, a death of a loved one, an injury, something that sets you back. How are you responding to that? Well, again, you go back to the toolkit. I keep a gratitude journal. It's something that I find really valuable for me. It's not valuable for everyone, but for me it is. I wrote down a list of 50 of the greatest moments in my life. When I have challenges and I'm feeling really low and anxious, I take a step back. I'll look up that list. I have it digitally, I have it physically, and I'll step into one of those memories and I'll feel what it felt to relive one of those moments of my life. So there's lots of practical ways of kind of addressing this. And I think that's what's missing from the mental health conversation, because mental health could be classified into two broad buckets. You've got the clinical versions of mental health, which are, things like bipolar disorder or depression, anxiety, clinical depression, clinical anxiety. And then you have the everyday mental health that everyone faces. And we do mental health a disservice when we only think about it in the clinical and not enough in the daily. And certainly more awareness, less stigma needs to be brought to this attention here on the clinical side. And I think we've done a lot over the last 10 years to address that. But in both cases, we still need the practical. We need the so what? What are we going to do about it? And ultimately, for the majority, again, outside of pharmacology and other approaches, there are some very basic things that we can be doing to take care of ourselves, to challenge mental health resilience, so that when these difficult moments come, we're better prepared for them.
I love how you call it mental fitness, and know that it's also, from my perspective, mental toughness. The gratitude aspect, I think Goggins calls it the cookie jar. I love to hear that you have something that you relate back to religiously, just to see and remind yourself, but more accurately, step into those moments to know who you are, that you are that type of person who showed up. And it's not just something that happened to you, but I imagine there's some challenges in there that you've risen to the occasion and became the person that could meet the moment where the moment was at, instead of falling victim to circumstance. And stepping into those moments that you've thrived sounds like have allowed you, and this is where I have the question, have allowed you to spend less time ruminating in whatever is actually going on in front of you and just kind of bounce back faster. So, do you find that all of these practices managing the anxiety, being grateful, less time upset. I mean, Ray Dalio in Principles has that like circular motion.
I love that book, by the way.
Yeah, it's a great book. I'll go back to it. I think I even have it behind me somewhere. Maybe it's in one of the cabinets over here. Do you find that having these practices allows you? I mean, we were talking about emotional management before, and as an entrepreneur, it's so key. Mental toughness, mental fitness, mental health, all of these terms of art. I mean, do you find that having these practices, the benefit is you spend less time ruminating so you could spend more time performing, more time being present, more time in moments that matter? What would you say is the upside of all these practices that maybe some people would consider woo woo or unnecessary or too cliche and doesn't really carry that same weight that you and I may put on it?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the wonderful thing about all this stuff is I don't need to convince anyone of anything. All I have to do is to put it to the test. You can go ahead and pretend this stuff doesn't exist or doesn't impact, but you'll do it to your own detriment, or you can benefit from it. These are millennia old, tried and true principles, and almost everything isn't this new kind of magic pill. Things like gratitude practices have existed for a long time. We used to just call it prayer. And things like, breath work have existed for a very long time. Physical challenges like cold or heat exposure have existed for a long time. We just didn't used to have air conditioning or heat in our homes, our cars, and our places of work. So nutritional deficits play a big role in terms of kind of how we feel and function. And so all these things matter. So I want to get to your question, which is like, what's the benefit? And the benefit isn't that I don't have moments of spin, or I don't have moments where I'm like, oh, this is hard, or this is, I'm not prepared for this. The difference is my bounce back time is reduced, meaning some people, when they start to go down a downward cycle, it takes them a long time to come back up. People can spend days, weeks, months, years, even decades in moments of self-pity, in self-doubt, moments of despair and depression. And again, separating clinical depression, which I think is something different, but just moments of not being at their best. I have moments like this. During the pandemic, I remember having this feeling like, I don't know why I'm so depressed. Like I like think everything in my life is good, but I'm feeling these moments of like down. And it hit me because I joke, like the moment it hit me is when I was sitting in the bathtub eating a pint of ice cream. And I was like, what am I doing? Like, why am I, and what I realized is I was not taking care of myself. I was not moving my body enough. And when I self-analyzed, I was like, oh, okay, I've got to do the work. I'm responsible for figuring this out. And that was a big turning point for me. And so it's just, the bounce back is the biggest benefit. And it's the same thing mentally and physically. You get an injury, you're more likely to bounce back and come back if you've done the pre-work to set yourself up. Same thing with the mental health piece. And the good news is people just have to take the time to put in the effort and the energy, and they will reap the rewards from it. The alternative is you can continue to distract yourself by pretending like these things don't exist with, social media, with content, with self-medicating behaviors like alcohol and drugs, or you can actually put in the work. And the cool thing is you feel life to such a higher level when you're doing those things.
That's exactly it. You feel life to such a higher level. Sometimes I regret that it took me this long to get to that point because there's still moments of, like you said, spin. But at the same time, there's just a higher quality of life that you can lead more often than not when you regularly and consistently utilize these practices like you outlined. And as someone who deals with, I was speaking to a class at Stanford about mental toughness in the age of AI, and everyone in the class was saying they want to be a startup founder to some degree, but they don't realize the level of mental resilience. A lot of people don't. I don't, right? Be so naive that you start, so bold that you finish. Like, it's so important for people to understand at the outset to arm themselves with these tools at a younger age and an earlier stage so they can be prepared to meet moments. And speaking of meeting moments, Roan is on an upward trajectory. What does it mean to you to see it thrive over the last 10 years? I imagine you define thrive differently than maybe your consumer defines thrive. But now that you're here, how has this journey impacted you and where do you see it going?
Yeah, it's been an incredible blessing to see some of the success and the hard work pay off. But, I kind of remind myself we're still early in this journey. We view this not as a 5-year or a 10-year plan. We view this as a 50-year plan. And there's so much more work to be done. And I think by taking that longer term view, it helps with the ups and downs. I showed our team this cool graph of, if you look at the first 24 months of our revenue zoomed in, right? Like, and you see these like mountains and valleys and like good moments and bad moments. And then you zoom out and you look at our revenue over the course of 10 years. It just looks like this, like almost straight line of up, like upward sales. And what's funny is, in the moment, in those like small moments, you're like, this is stressful. This is, oh, we're high-fiving each other. We're so smart. Or I can't believe we missed, da, 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 da. In the grand scheme of things, that line just kind of just does this. Like you do this with the stock market, you do this with so many things in life. As long as you don't give up, you keep going and you just keep figuring it out. You just on a daily basis. And we know clinically through research that positive thoughts are good generally, but we conclusively know that negative thinking is bad. That we do know. And so sometimes we make the mistake of thinking that I just have to be positive all the time. Because I don't want to be negative, I just have to be positive all the time. And the truth is that there is a space between negative thinking and positive thinking that is a really powerful space to be in. And that's what we call neutral thinking. And neutral thinking, there's several great books about neutral thinking. It's just about, what does this situation require of me? It's not positive or negative. During COVID, people could have like said, well, this isn't happening, so I'm just going to pretend like it's not, and I'm going to have a positive attitude. Well, that wouldn't have been a good decision, right? Like if there's a thunderstorm outside, you're like, well, I'm just going to pretend like it's sunny. That's not good decision making. But you don't have to say, oh, it's raining, therefore my day's ruined. You can say, okay, it's raining. Practically speaking, what does this situation require of me? I need to adjust plans. And so I try to spend a lot less time. As soon as I start feeling like I'm in a negative thought pattern, I try and say, I can't get to positive, but I can get to neutral. What does this situation require of me? And that's really helpful.
I like that. I'm going to use that. I want to see how that plays. I have tools in the toolbox, but having that notion of, let me get to neutral thinking, what does this moment require? I think it's a very powerful litmus test and framework to leverage. In the couple minutes that we have left, there's a question that I pose to all my guests that I'd like to pose to you.
Sure.
If the future version of yourself from 10 years from now were to fly in and offer you some advice in order to get there, what do you think he would say to you?
I don't know. I hope that guy is super smart. I think that he would probably say the same thing that I would say to myself 10 years ago, which is just keep going. Believe it's going to work out. Like you're going to have hard moments. You're going to have sad moments. You're going to have happy moments, but just keep going. Don't give up, and know that it's all going to work together for your good. And I really believe that, but it's easy to lose that on the day-to-day basis. So I think that's what I'd probably tell myself. And also, watch what you eat. It really matters. Something simple.
Nate, this was awesome. Thank you so much for the time. Please let the audience know where they can keep up with your journey.
Awesome. Well, yeah, best thing to do is to follow us online or shop with us. We have 16 retail stores. Our website is roan.com, RHONE.com. And I'm on social and Instagram and LinkedIn primarily, and love meeting really amazing people on those platforms.
This is awesome, man. Thank you so much. Till the next one.